you very much. Thanks to Netlify. Thanks to Chris Back for having me here. I'm going to go off script a little bit, I think. I'm going to talk about personalized e-commerce stores at scale, I promise. I always learned that there's something called a compliment sandwich, where you give a compliment first, and then you say something critical, and then you give a compliment. I'm going to flip it around and do a bit of a rant sandwich. So I'll rant a little bit, then I'll talk about personalized e-commerce at Hilding Anders, and then I'll probably rant a little bit at the end as well. And one of the reasons I want to rant a little bit is because, I'm really nervous. The standard at this event is super high, so the presentations have been really good. I think there's also a little bit of hyperbole around sort of composable. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about that, having had some experiences of this in the real world. A little bit about myself. I'm not going to go into depth. I started as a web developer in 1997. For this audience, I just had this epiphany yesterday that I was actually developing in server-side JavaScript about 10 years before Node was invented. It was a Netscape Livewire, and it was basically JavaScript on the server side. It was amazing. Couldn't do very much, but we didn't need that much. I think one of the really interesting things is it's made me very appreciative of build tools and build stacks and things like Netlify, because back then we would SSH into a live server and edit live code in VI, and just pray. Which was a very different approach. I've done a lot of different things. I've also been in agency land. I like that word, agency land. I'm going to steal it. And then I went client side, as it's called in agency land, for my last two jobs. There's a little bit of an update. I'm actually now, as of this month, I'm the former CTO at Hilding Anders for various reasons of geopolitical intrigue and the financial state of the world. The project I was working on has been postponed, and I decided that was going to be postponed without me. But that's a different matter. I think in terms of what that means for this conversation is I can just be 10% more honest than I could if I was still CTO at Hilding Anders, so probably it'll be good for the rants. I wanted to sort of start with three takeaways. I think, if I were an outsider coming to this event and listening to the first two half days of presentations, I would not think that composable commerce is difficult. I sort of get the feeling, if I wanted to note down, summarize, that if you just empower your developers and use best-of-breed SaaS solutions, everything is going to be hunky-dory, and the wonders of the world, your response times are going to be instant, and everything is good. That's not really the way I feel about it. I've been through a couple of these projects. It's difficult, and it continues to be difficult. I just wanted to say that because I want everyone to leave this and understand that if they're being successful, they're doing something amazing. But I also think it's worthwhile. I think it's very easy for us, I guess, in the know to see the business case for composable. One of the challenges being on the sort of client side, on the side of big business, is that business case sometimes is quite a long-term business case. So you might say, I know for certain that compared to this monolith, in 4 years' time, if we go down this route, we will be much better, in a much better place than we are today. Now, a lot of big companies don't have 4 years to wait. They're publicly listed. They need that result in the next quarter. So therefore, some of these sort of POC-type processes, or something that we saw with Sennheiser yesterday, really interesting projects where you do small things fast, are part of the way to go. And then, the third takeaway is that I hope I have a few attempts at some answers for what to do, or at least what I've tried to do. I wanted to start with this. Architectures, including composable commerce, are platonic ideals. You're as likely to see a pure composable architecture in the wild as you're likely to see a jackalope or a centaur. It just doesn't exist. And I think it's really important that if you go into a business, if you're not building from scratch, I get it. It exists. I'm exaggerating here for clarity. But in a lot of the businesses I've been in, which are huge B2B companies trying to do direct to consumer, everything is a mess. There's a lot of living systems, there's redundant data in different systems, and yes, you can start building composable on that, but you're never going to get there. It's going to be a sort of eternal. So when you were asking, who's done with that journey? I don't think there's such a thing as done with that journey. I think it's going to be a constant sort of attempt at getting closer to a composable ideal, the platonic ideal of a composable commerce architecture. So the core of this project, Hilding Anders, it's a large conglomerate of bed brands and sleep brands. sales in over 40 countries, almost €1 billion of net sales. Maybe some of you know some of the brands. Slumberland is big in the UK. Carpe Diem is a luxury bed brand. Beko is Switzerland's biggest bed brand. But they're a traditional B2B production company, or they were at least when they started this project. They are one of the world's leading bedding and mattress suppliers. They want to become, as in the words of the chief digital officer, a consumer-focused digital-first health and wellness company offering leadership in innovative sleep solutions. It's a very big cultural change, but it's also a very big technology change. So we're talking about apps with sleep coaching apps. We're talking about helping people sleep better rather than just selling them beds. And so that's just to frame the journey, I think, in a slightly larger context. I had a slide around composable commerce because this is called the Headless Commerce Summit. I wanted to sort of distinguish between headless and composable. I think we've been through this in the last couple of days. I'll leave the slide in there, but I'm not going to go into detail. I want to start the journey in a little bit of a different place than Hilding Anders. Before I went to Hilding Anders in 2018, I was hired by Bang & Olufsen to build a new e-commerce engine for this high-end luxury audio brand. And I was actually hired as a consultant to do a classic vendor selection from agency land. I went through all the different tools, and one of the tools on the board was essentially not really a tool, but more of an architecture. I said, well, there's also the opportunity to do this in a Mac architecture. I don't think the word composable existed in 2018, but as a Mac architecture with a headless front end. The chief digital officer asked if I would be willing to come aboard and lead the project and be director of e-commerce. And I said, essentially, under one condition is that we do this with the headless Mac architecture. That is the only architecture, the only tool I will be a part of building. So we built that. It's not that dissimilar from what Sennheiser has built. So we didn't have an existing commerce engine that was useful. So we did something a little bit different. We took commerce tools. We essentially took the existing website, which had no commerce, and sort of injected buy buttons onto the product pages as phase one. So we wanted to get the e-commerce engine in place, and that took about 3 months. And then in the next 3 months, we rebuilt the entire front end as a headless React application. The reason I'm saying this is that some of the learnings I had from Bang & Olufsen have been really sort of important for my journey at Hilding Anders. So when I came into Hilding Anders, there was an existing BigCommerce setup. It was a little bit difficult to maintain. I want to be very clear. This is not a criticism of BigCommerce as a platform. BigCommerce is a brilliant platform. We kept using it. We built on top of it. It was just that the way it had been built, for various reasons, mostly that there was no maturity in the business when they started this project. So they were building BigCommerce for 3 different brands in parallel. None of the brands really knew what they wanted with e-commerce in detail. So it had become quite quickly had become a clunky platform to maintain. Load times weren't great. It was a BigCommerce Shogun implementation. Again, that's nothing with the tools. It was just the way it had been built. The focus had been elsewhere. The business had changed its mind so many times that at the end of the day, it was just a very clunky front end. And we wanted really to explore personalization. And one of the main reasons for that is because we wanted to have this journey into becoming a sleep company. We really recognized that on average, people buy a bed every 7 years. And there's very different modes that you enter the site on, whether you're looking for accessories or looking for beds, and a lot of other things in between. So there's absolutely no code in this presentation, but there is a little bit of a system architecture diagram. I apologize for the size of it. I guess I could have redrawn it in orange, but I didn't. Just to say very briefly that we had BigCommerce. We added Contentful as a CMS. So we basically replaced Shogun with Contentful for various reasons. And then we wanted to build a headless front end. We used Netlify, we used Next.js, we used Uniform. I think if people are interested in the details of Uniform, they're here. There's a booth downstairs. I was very sort of positive about what we can do with their canvas. I think partially the reason we chose them is that they enable essentially edge functions in an interface that a marketer can use. So they have a DXP, as they call it. It's sort of a graphical interface where you can build pages, but in that interface you can enable edge functions for personalization, for A/B testing. I have a long rant about A/B testing, but I think I'm not going to do it because I only have 10 minutes left. Maybe later. I think one of the reasons we went with that is my experiences at Bang & Olufsen where we got headless right, but we didn't quite get composability right. We ended up having too much complexity in the React front end for it to be what I felt was composable. So it was a single monolithic React front end that was a little bit hard to deal with without developers. That's exaggerating a little bit because we could build pages in Contentful. The marketers could build pages based on modules. It was a little bit of a clunky journey. There were a lot of restrictions on it. We wanted to make it more flexible for the marketers. We were also doing this across multiple brands, so we wanted the composability also to be a module library that could be branded to multiple different brands at the same time. So same code, different styling, so essentially reusing components across brands. And Uniform simplifies that composability. Again, like all of the solutions, it's not the end-all solution, but it did that. It did a lot for us. Back to developer experience, I think that is an important thing. We wanted to be able to keep our developers, but we also really wanted the scalability of edge functions in an environment where we didn't have the luxury of having a large development team to do personalization and A/B testing and implement it on a day-to-day basis. So again, this is a different view of what we did. At the end of the day, we chose, back to sort of the POC discussion, we had BigCommerce, as I said, in there. We built a lot of bilateral integrations before my time. I would have done it differently. I promise. I swear I would have done it differently. Don't kick me out. But we had a lot of very tight integrations from BigCommerce into back-end systems, ERP systems, POS systems, and things like that. The cost of replacing BigCommerce was large, but we wanted to go headless. We wanted to be able to do it with multiple brands, and we needed to do it fast. So Tailwind UI became sort of the basis for a POC with Uniform. In all honesty, when we started this with Uniform, their product was, I think we were one of the first customers on Uniform. So it was very important for us to try this out. And in 4 weeks, we built one of the brands, a full website with Tailwind components and Uniform and Netlify, essentially, Contentful. Which was sort of the proof of that we could take this iterative approach and put a headless front end, multi-brand headless front end in front of BigCommerce and work from there, and then maybe fix the bottom, the tighter integrations later. So I think that was a very sort of successful POC. I think the idea that we could use Uniform both as an engine to enable these edge functions for personalization and for A/B testing, but also for marketers to be able to build custom pages was really critical to us to believe that we could build multi-brand front end on top of the same back end. So I think key takeaways. It says closing, but I have a few more slides because I promised a rant at the end as well. So this is just the closing of the case, and then we'll rant a little bit more. Headless is important, but it is only the beginning of the journey. So I think we've seen, a lot of speakers have said something similar, but I think the other important part, which I haven't seen as much, is that composable is going to be a continuous journey. I spent 3 years at Bang & Olufsen. We started with headless. As I said, we didn't achieve full composability on the front end, but we were certainly working towards that. We started establishing a culture where when we went looking for an order management system, we went looking for an API-first, sort of Mac-aware order management system. I think that's the process you have to do as well. You have to sort of establish a culture where that's the first choice, not just of the developers, because frankly, if your developers are good, that's always going to be their first choice, but of the business itself. And there's a lot of reasons that can be difficult. So, I think one of the big ones that we sometimes ignore is the finances of it, the sort of business side of it. We heard speakers yesterday talk about how composable helps IT and marketing work closer together. Now the new enemy is procurement, because they absolutely hate this stuff. They hate 18 SLAs with 18 SaaS providers delivering things that they have no idea what are. So that can be a problem in itself. There's problems with the licensing models. It's wonderful to say that an e-commerce engine, if it's composable and Mac architecture, I can just choose what I want to use. I can say I don't need to use the product catalog. I can just use my PIM for that. I don't need to use the customer database. I can just use the CDP for that. But in most cases, the licensing model is for everything. And for businesses that aren't in high fashion and have, not super high margins, that's a problem. It's a problem if I had long conversations with Bolt Checkout. I love their checkout. It's amazing. They can do amazing things, but it's another almost 1% of revenue. Now, if you stack these tools on top of each other and each of them eats half or a whole % of revenue, for a lot of businesses, that's just not going to happen. The business case isn't going to be there. So I think there's a sense where we still need a little bit more maturity for a lot of businesses to be able to get to composability. In that sense, I think, this is a diagram I took off the Mac Alliance website. This is what a best-of-breed Mac architecture, composable architecture looks like on paper. Gartner has their own version and Forrester has their own version, but basically this is it. It's like a lovely little, nicely aligned boxes of unique functionality. In some diagrams, you'll even have, front-end components that match the back end, and you have this beautiful composability where every front-end component that the marketer can put in their website in Uniform or whatever other DXP they use is linked to a little nugget of back-end functionality that does just that. That's amazing. I love it. But this is the architecture of sort of what an architecture looks like in the real world, like Hilding Anders. We can pretend there's only one set of APIs, but that's not true. We have a POS system that was implemented over here. We have an e-commerce engine that was implemented here. We have an ERP system. We have 6 different places for product information, 4 for customer information. And yeah, in theory, we have a single source of truth. In theory, we can say, I can say as the CTO, anything we do with customer data needs to come through the CDP, or anything we do with product data needs to come through the product information, until, the retail department in the Far East or the retail department in Southern Europe thinks that it would be really, really great to build an in-store display of products, and it's easier for them to use the POS system because they have full access rights to the POS system, and boom, you have a front end that links directly into not the single source of truth. And that sort of development over time, this is what happens in organic organizations. Like, you can pretend that you can control all these things, and you can pretend that there's just one group of developers in marketing or wherever sitting and working with these commerce technologies, but you're building front ends that interact with customers all over the place. And maintaining that composability and getting anything that looks like this is really, really difficult. You have to sort through this. You have to understand this. Your architects need to understand that there's redundant data. So you have your e-commerce engine, then because you want to do, split fulfillment or some such feature, you go and you add an OMS, but the OMS does 60% of what the e-commerce engine does, and then you have the POS system, it does some of that as well, and you're constantly needing to clean up and replace those systems. So, and I think as I started off saying, I totally think composability is worth it. Composable commerce is worth it. I just wanted to spend a little bit of this time sort of explaining that in reality, it's actually, it's the architectural nitty-gritty that gets this diagram to be a little bit cleaner. It's never going to get here, but it'll be a little bit cleaner. You can move the boxes apart a little bit. You can make some fundamental decisions. You can close off certain APIs, but that's a journey that from the inside of a company looks very different than it does from agency land, and can be super complicated. I think that was really the main rant I wanted to make. I think, remember so in terms of the takeaways, composability is difficult, but it's totally worth it. And I think there are ways, pragmatic ways for doing things like we did at Hilding Anders, which is, take some of like find out which pieces of technology will give you the biggest ROI improvements in the shortest time, and start there and start building. And looking at things like Uniform, looking at things like Netlify edge functions to get to personalization quick. I just have time for my A/B test rant. I love my A/B test rant. I've worked, as I said, I've had a 25-year career. I've seen waves of personalization technology and A/B test technology crash over the market in huge chunks and just leave everyone soaked and not doing personalization. And A/B testing, if you do it with a lot of frameworks for smaller companies that don't have millions and millions of visitors, basically the moment you implement your A/B test, you're implementing additional JavaScript, you're slowing down your page, you're breaking your own A/B test. So statistically, implementing the A/B test ruins your A/B test. Edge functions, whether it's with Uniform or just straight out of Netlify, solves that problem for, I think, the first time in the 25 years that I've worked in technology. And I think that's an amazing little thing to end with. Thanks a lot.